Hello and welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records in alphabetical order like a big nerd and talk about why I love them. We are still working our way through the letter G, and today we will be listening to what I think is one of the greatest albums of the 20th century. In the West, we have accomplished some incredible feats in popular music, but we tend to have a bit of a myopic approach to music from other cultures, in particular if it's not sung in English. In fact, we kind of tend to lump it all together somewhat arrogantly as world music. We're going to be listening to an album today, a letter G album, that topped charts internationally, that went platinum, that was followed by a promotional tour that broke attendance records all over the world. It was recognized by the New York Times, Rolling Stone, The Village Voice, The Wall Street Journal, among others. It is one of my desert island discs, and its author has won 27 Grammys. But because 24 of those 27 Grammys were Latin Grammys, I know of no one outside of my family who is familiar with this record. So my goal today is to sort of bridge that accessibility gap and act as a cultural and literal translator to show you all what you've been missing. And it is my greatest hope that you will derive even just a fraction of the boundless joy that I experience every time I listen to this album. The music we're going to be listening to today has a rich and incredibly interesting history, and I think that being at least a little familiar with that history is integral to really getting why this music is so brilliant. So I think we should start there. Let's go. I should probably start filming at some point, but this is so good. Oh, I love this album. This is gonna be fun. Well, it'll be fun once we get past the first part. As a disclaimer, I took a whole semester course on Latin American music. Shout out to Professor Pino Ojeda. If you're watching this, your course changed my life. And that was still a cursory overview of the complex tapestry of this world of music. So this episode will only just scratch the surface. But you'll be pleased to know that if you enjoy what you hear in this episode, there is a whole world of music behind it. I'd also like to offer a bit of a content warning at the top of this episode because the story begins in a grim place, and we're going to deal with topics like genocide and slavery. So if you're not in the mood for genocide and slavery today, I fully understand, and you can just skip ahead or even watch a totally different video. I won't be offended. Okay, here we go. Approximately 500 years ago, a small group of Europeans arrived in the Caribbean and declared that they had discovered the place despite ample evidence to the contrary, in the form of the hundreds of thousands of people who were already in residence there. And in an immensely arrogant fashion, these newcomers immediately set them to work in their own home. And to my utter dismay, and to the detriment of human culture in general, nearly none of them survived the ordeal. Not to be stopped by a little setback like genocide, these European interlopers decided to partake in a little international activity that involved uprooting real human beings with thoughts and ideas and feelings and loves and families and relationships, all of those good things that human beings experience, and selling them as transactional property. And I know that most of us are aware of this, but seriously, this happened. Human beings bought and sold. I'm a tiny, tiny, tiny ethnic minority where I live, and occasionally people will ask me if I've done my genealogy, because that's a very popular thing to do here. It's kind of a bummer because on the one side is Scottish settlers, and then the other side goes dark after not too many generations because transatlantic slave trade. Bummer. Anyway, in Cuba, prior to the complete abolition of slavery in around 1873, nearly 1 million African people were brought in to be enslaved. They were mostly from the Yoruba nation, but they also came in from like Cameroon and Togo, the Congo, Ghana, Mozambique. They brought them in from everywhere. Disgraceful. Remember, I'm not being paid for my impartiality here. Technically, I'm not being paid. They initially separated them all into mixed ethnic groups so that they couldn't talk to each other and to, like, prevent uprisings, but unfortunately that was bad for morale duh. And I would like to be able to say that when they redistributed everyone along ethnic lines, it was because they realized what a cruel practice it had been to separate everyone in the first place, but alas, it was because they weren't working hard enough, and they thought they'd work better if they were actually surrounded by people with whom they could speak. Again, disgraceful. So they allowed these enslaved people to retain their culture, their language, and their religious practices, but essentially only under the condition that they convert to Christianity. This was sort of a running theme at the time. Fortunately, there was a lot of crossover between the Catholic saints and the Yoruba gods, which meant that these enslaved people could attend Catholic services while still honoring their own religious practices, their own deities. And the fusion of these two practices resulted in Santeria, a uniquely Afro-Cuban religious practice. So a lot of African religious traditions centered around rhythmic drumming with multiple percussionists building polyrhythms.
The drummers of these ceremonies choose one of over 200 rhythms belonging to the Yoruba gods. They play several different rhythms, calling forth the spirits of different gods, each of which possesses the body of a worshiper.
Which eventually began to bleed from sacred music to secular, especially when the best musicians were sort of emerging from these neighborhoods and these communities that had the strongest Santeria practices. So one of the earliest forms of Afro-Cuban music was formed when these African rhythms started to fuse with the guitar music that came from the Spanish colonizers. That music was called son, and it sounds like this. Son de la Roma. So when son started to come into contact with other forms of music like American swing around the 30s and 40s, all of these other instruments started to join the guitars and bongos format, the sort of trio format of the music. That format grew to expand instruments like upright bass, trumpets, trombones, saxophones, piano. So it started to evolve into a different animal. Son then traveled with Cuban exiles around the time of the Cuban Revolution in the late 50s to New York City, where it blended with the music of expats from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, also jazz, also soul, also early rock and roll, and it began to adopt lyrics that were more relevant to life in urban America.
We got a culture and we have something to say that as a resident of a city, you're going to find interesting too. Because bottom line is you're addressing people, and people's lives.
At this point, a Dominican band leader named Johnny Pacheco formed a music label in order to capture this new hybrid music.
It was Cuban music that we took and we changed the arrangements. Being that most of the guys were born here or grew up in New York, we had the rock influence, the jazz influence, and we changed the approach. And it was a New York sound,
which he christened salsa. And salsa sounds like this. So some broad characteristics of salsa music include that African rhythm section that we discussed earlier. So you've got instruments like bongos, clave, maracas, cowbell, timbales. And the basic structure of a salsa song is there's a verse portion at the beginning, and then the end of the song, or the back half of the song, is a series of calls and responses called a montuno. Essentially, the way that works is the call is given by a group to a fixed set of lyrics and a fixed melody, and to that, a lead singer responds with an improvised melody and lyrics. And sometimes that lead singer will have a trademark or catchphrase that they'll sing during this portion. Sort of like the salsa equivalent to DJ Khaled. We're going to go into some examples a little bit later, because right now we're going to travel to the Dominican Republic to talk about merengue and bachata. Now, I could just recite the history of the Dominican Republic and its culture and its music, and you could just take my word for it, but I actually have access to a real-life, in-the-flesh Dominican person, my mom! People of the internet, I would like to introduce you to my mother, Angela. Mom, say hi to the internet.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here with you, and looking forward. Don't say anything bad about me, But yeah, no, I'm enjoying being here and helping Nancy with this week's video.
Yeah, if you say anything bad about her, I'll come for you. Absolutely warms the cockles of my heart that she agreed to be a part of this video because she's pretty cool. So the origins of merengue are pretty similar to the origins of Afro-Cuban music, namely that enslaved Africans were brought in to replace indigenous Taino people because, again, genocide, illness, basically wiped everyone out. Absolutely shameful. And with them they brought their musical traditions. So merengue developed in around the mid-1800s when Spanish guitars and African drums and a Taino instrument called a guiro began to be played in combination.
Most of that music, all they had was a guitar, probably some tamboras, maracas, and a guira, which is, I don't know how do you call it.
It's called a guira.
It's yeah.
Do you know it's a Taino instrument?
Yep. They used to use calabaza.
Really?
And they will make cuts on the skin, let it dry, and then they will use it like that. Some of the groups in the country, they still use that.
Yeah.
Now they do it with stainless steel.
Metal, yeah.
And the metal.
Then in the late 1800s, the accordion began to take the place of the guitar as one of the dominant instruments in the form.
The merengue, typical of Dominican Republic, they have an accordion on them.
Right. And do you know how the accordions got there?
No.
A bunch of Germans showed up in the 19th century and traded them for tobacco.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There you go.
So
they came in the country. That's how they did the accordion.
That's
then.
right. So
I
you
didn't
end
know
up
that.
Yeah, I learned that last night. A little bit later, around 1930, a brutal dictator and grade A asshole named Rafael Trujillo came to power. He was a real nasty piece of work, and he essentially terrorized the nation for about 30 years. Although you don't look a day over 25, it'll surprise the internet to know that you're old enough to remember life under Trujillo. Do you have any memories of that?
Yes, I do. I remember the parades. They were amazing parades and those as a child. Because all the base was presented to Trujillo. If not, you'll be in trouble anyway.
What does in trouble look like?
In trouble was really bad. So bad that if you, in your street, you hear the sound of a Volkswagen Beetle, someone was in trouble that night. And it could be that that person was not alive the next day.
What was the significance of the Volkswagen? Was that the vehicle that...
The Volkswagen was the vehicle that the secret police was using. If was alive, they were taken to prison and tortured badly. Few of them survived, other ones didn't survive at all, the torture that they were getting at the time.
This was in your town?
In my town, there were people that they were against the regime. And those people, they were always running from one farm to the other, hiding. Most of the houses, they used to have a double closet. In the wardrobe, there was another hiding place behind the clothes, because if they hear the sound of the Volkswagen, that's where everybody or whoever was hiding, that's where they will go.
He also sort of established merengue as a national trademark and boosted it and manipulated it for propaganda purposes. Did you know that Trujillo is a big part of the reason why merengue is so big and such a big part of the national consciousness? Yes. You did?
Yes. The orchestra of Luis Alberti, one of my uncles.
I was going to say, did he have any relation to us?
He was related to my grandfather from my mother's side. And so he pretty much hired him to write all the songs.
Yeah, he was hired by Trujillo.
By Trujillo to write this, to compose songs for him. Everything was about him, his family, how great he was doing for the country.
Yo siempre quiero que el general Trujillo esté en la batuta de nuestra nación.
So it was political propaganda.
And there was a political propaganda, yes.
In addition to his other winning attributes, the man was also a racist, and he denied any African heritage in Dominican music. His composer, my alleged great-great-great-great-uncle, great-great-uncle? Great-great-great-uncle, alleged uncle of old, said, and I quote, I don't believe there is any connection with African rhythms. Merengue appears to be a mixture of Spanish and rural tunes from the countryside. Trujillo was eventually taken out of the picture. Fortunately, merengue didn't die with him. It continued to be a part of the national heritage and is still popular today. Now let's talk about bachata. Bachata is a genre that was developed in the rural areas of the Dominican Republic.
In the town that I grew up, there were probably around 1,000 people, and that was within 10 streets in the town. Believe it or not, there were 4 what they would call bars or nightclub, and at the time there was not any concern about loudspeakers or whatever. Every one of those bars had a speaker outside, so it didn't matter where you were in the town, you would listen to music. And there were at the time a lot of the bachata being played.
When people in those rural areas moved to the cities, it became the music of the urban working class. Unfortunately, this was a demographic that Trujillo identified as having a lot of potential for uprising, and so he suppressed bachata and demonized it as like uncouth and unsophisticated.
The government was not that happy with them because they considered from the low socioeconomic group was not considered that nice to sing those songs because of the double meaning.
They're a bit filthy, huh?
Yeah. For us as a kid, we used to dress up like grown up and try to sing those songs or dance how the people used to dance those songs.
How do you dance to those songs?
Oh, well, that was very close together.
Oh. It was relegated to bars and brothels. Fortunately, Trujillo died. And that music was allowed to disseminate. This is what bachata sounds like.
Por eso es que te digo, ladrona, mira qué fácil, me robaste el corazón.
Again, these histories are far from comprehensive, but I think for the purposes of this episode, they're probably enough to be going with. Let's talk about Juan Luis Guerra, who is this guy and the author of today's album. Juan Luis Guerra is a Dominican composer, performer, singer, songwriter, arranger, producer, all-around genius. He's sold 15 million records. It's a lot of records. Count them, 15 million. And as mentioned up top, he's won 27 Grammys. I'm not gonna say 3 Grammys and 24 Latin Grammys because that makes it sound like Latin Grammys aren't real legitimate Grammys. He has won 27 individual Grammys. He's significant not only because he was so decorated with all of these Grammys, which I imagine would be very difficult to all carry at once, but also because he changed the face of Dominican music, both in his homeland and internationally. He studied jazz composition at Berkeley in the States, and then he took that formal musical education and brought it home with him, and it began to influence his compositions in the Latin American music styles that we have discussed today already, salsa and merengue and bachata. His music was also informed by other Western influences, as our Storytime correspondent will tell us now. Good day, Internet. We will be taking today's reading from Havana Heat, Bronx Beat, Salsa. When asked about his success, Juan Luis Guerra says, "Perhaps it's because of the many musical references in our music which the public recognize because they sound familiar. For example, our songs are full of the Beatles, but the audiences don't consciously realize it." Will it Beatles? Yes, it will! And despite what my great-great-great-great-great-uncle may have said in the past, Juan Luis Guerra was aware that his music was rooted in Africa, and he made that explicit. For instance, he brought on a Congolese guitarist named Diblo Dibala. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm doing my best. In the late 80s to incorporate soukous music traditions into his merengue, which sounds like this. Today's album also features a sort of merengue-ized cover of a song from the Central African Republic called Dele Priscilla. The music video and all of it is explicitly nodding to the music's African roots. Another influence for him is the Dominican Republic's indigenous heritage. The album after this one was called Areito. It's so named for a traditional sort of music and dance that was performed by the Taino people. And generally speaking, he tends to write these very cheery sounding songs about things like inflation, and underfunded healthcare. His lyrical style is poetic and political, kind of surreal in places, but also vernacular, so very accessible. If you speak Spanish, not very accessible if you're not a speaker of the language. But I'm gonna help you along with that, so don't you worry. Do you know he's 6'4"?
I know.
Very
And
tall.
he's beautiful too. You didn't hear that there.
He recorded a track in the late 80s with an artist named Sonia Silvestre, and he was kind of dismayed to find out that it was going to be a bachata song until it became a hit in the States, at which point he thought, maybe I should explore this further, which resulted in this album of music. It is called Bachata Rosa, because Sonia Silvestre said that his bachatas were sort of rosy, pink by comparison against her red bachatas. So take from that what you will. Bachata Rosa, pink bachata. This is an album which helped make bachata accessible and acceptable for the middle and the upper classes, because you'll remember it was like poor people music. So now the upper crust could listen to it without being reminded of the existence of lower classes. Hooray! It also introduced the form to an international audience. Do you remember when Bachata Rosa came out?
I was already here in New Zealand, but then in 1992, we went to visit to Dominican Republic. The godparents of Nancy, they took us to one of these resorts, and happened that Juan Luis Guerra was performing that Saturday. So we took Nancy with us. Of course, the concert didn't start until around 11 p.m. and then the music started. But it was interesting that he played from 11 p.m. to around 2 o'clock in the morning without stopping. Everybody's on their feet, dancing, singing, and it was the best party I ever went. And so every time that I said this, Nancy said, "Oh, I wish that I had been there."
Yeah, because it's one of my favorite artists ever. I have seen him live and I have no memory of it.
Yeah, I know.
This album hit it big, obviously, all across South America, but also Spain, and for some reason, the Netherlands. Do you know this album charted in the Netherlands?
There are a lot of Dominicans in the Netherlands.
What? All of the genres that we have looked at in today's episode already, plus Juan Luis Guerra's personal influences, all come together in this incredible melting pot of an album. So the rest of this episode will be a closer look at one of those songs, specifically a love song, or more accurately, a love letter. The song is called Carta de Amor, literally, love letter. Oh, I love this album, and I think this is my favorite track on it. It's such a good piece of music. There are three main elements that I want to pick apart from this song. The first is the rhythms. The second is the way that this song fits into the canon of salsa music. And the last is the way that Juan Luis Guerra puts his personal fingerprint on this track. Let's begin. So broadly speaking, if you're listening to music, it probably has a downbeat. Let's play the introduction to this song in particular so that I can show you that downbeat. Oh, I forgot. I was just listening and enjoying it. So that's your downbeat. It is the heartbeat of the song.
It's a feeling, a heartbeat. Gugung.
Gugung. And syncopation is essentially all of the beats that fit in between those downbeats. Music that is derived from Africa is all about syncopation. When you layer all of those different individual rhythms together, you get what's called polyrhythms. You'd think it would be cacophonous to do that, but when it all comes together properly, when it's done well, it's absolutely magical. Let's take the intro again as an example. So you've got your downbeat, right? Try and hold that in your head as we're listening to it. I'm gonna clap the rhythm that the bass is doing. So that's one of the different polyrhythms. Now let's listen to the horns. Now let's listen to the piano. And those are just the lead instruments. You would think that it's cacophony, but they're different textures. This is what the percussion is doing underneath all of that. And when I say percussion, I'm not talking about a single percussion instrument. I'm talking about a whole bunch of them working in tandem. That sounds like this. So the liner notes list all of the musicians on the album, but not by song. So I can't tell you exactly what percussion instruments are on this track, but percussion instruments listed for the album include timbal, tambora, bata, guira, congas, bongo, sincero, maracas, general percusión, percussion. So it could be any combination of those things. In any case, it sounds divine and complicated, which I love. While it sounds like that shouldn't work at all, I believe that it does work because each of those different instruments brings a totally different texture, which means that nothing is detracting from anything else, nothing is taking center stage. It all fits together beautifully like a polyrhythmic jigsaw puzzle. And tracks like these were the inspiration for me for songs that I've recorded, like one off my last EP called Broken Blueprint, which sounds like this. Line by line. Self-promo! Okay, so let's talk about how this song fits the salsa label. The first thing to note is that the bass line is anticipated. We sort of touched on that in the section about rhythms, but it means that the bass anticipates the downbeat. It arrives just before it. If you listen to the downbeat here, the bass is doing this. Da, 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 da. Which sounds counterintuitive maybe to Western ears because we're used to the bass establishing the downbeat. But it does not do that in salsa. It gives it that lurching rhythm which inspires you to dance, which of course is what you're supposed to do to this music. Duh. But you know, if you'd prefer to just sit in your seat and listen to it, that's acceptable also. Maybe not to my mother. We just won't tell her, right? The bass correspondent will show us. You've got that very full multifaceted rhythm section, which we definitely just discussed. The piano is playing this particular rhythmic pattern that is specific to salsa, which the piano correspondent will approximate now. Hello, this is my best approximation of that piano part. You've got your horn section with its piercing trumpets and that lovely warmth that's coming through from the bottom from the trombones. Like, honestly, why don't we have more trombones in Western music? These horn parts are lovely on their own. They're almost like a stand-in for backing vocals. I could honestly just listen to the horns and still love this song. I'd like to point out some of my favorite horn parts, if you'll indulge me. Here we go. Lovely counterpoint. Piano correspondent, can you break that down, please? Don't you love that da-da, 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 bah! It explodes, bah! Into the montuno. It's like a herald into the montuno. Pfft, lovely. I love that those trombone parts are harmonized because they're quite low. So there's sort of these very crunchy lower frequencies that are laying a foundation so that the trumpets can be laid over the top. It's like an orchestra unto itself. I interrupted. Let's continue. There's a sort of call and response in that section. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to it. Enough talking about horns. The horns in this song are wonderful, and that's just it, okay? We'll talk about it more later. And the last thing is the montuno that I was describing earlier, your call and response. The call echoes the lyrics of the chorus and has a fixed melody like this. And then all of the little bits in between is Juan Luis Guerra improvising his melody and his lyrics around them, and he's sort of riffing on the rest of the lyrics of the song. So this is the montuno. There's the call and the response.
Yeah.
They have their fixed form in order that the improvised bits can really shine. The lyrics are very image heavy. I write and I write. I receive nothing. Like ink in my pen is out and still I love you more. It's just lovely. I really love this part of the song. Surprise emotion. Didn't expect that. We're gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Not gonna cry over this lovely, cheerful song. The trademark catchphrase that I was talking about earlier, this is Juan Luis Guerra's. So that often features in his songs. That's oh yeah, that's his trademark. Yeah, and speaking of trademarks, let's just get into the ways that this artist in particular makes this form of music special in this song. Okay? Yes, good. Let's go. The first thing is the lyrics. As is probably abundantly clear, these lyrics are in Spanish, so my mum and I are going to do our very best to adequately convey the meaning of this song and to translate as faithfully as possible. They are high melodrama. At least call me by phone with
And give me a
hope of your love.
Yeah.
They are loaded with metaphor, like different metaphors even. He has concurrent metaphors running. What's a plazo fijo?
When you buy something at credit, you pay a fixed interest rate.
Oh. He has a suffering at a fixed interest rate in his heart.
Yeah, in Spanish makes sense.
Great.
And I would pay with a fixed interest while you are loving me.
Okay, because then later he
says,
says, Póliza de seguros. Is that an insurance policy?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Take this insurance policy.
Yeah, and if I die of love, you can have it.
Okay. That's all backed by the music. Essentially what the song is about is this guy's writing a love letter to someone who used to love him but does no longer, and he's making this sort of impassioned plea for her to love him again. Actually, gender's not specified, but I do think he's straight, so I think we can assume that it is a lady friend that he is writing to. The first thing to note is that the lyrics are actually literally structured like a letter, almost as though the listener is taking dictation for him. That's nice. You know, my beloved, don't make me suffer, comma, I've decided to write you a love letter. And in the sections of the song where he's sort of explicitly talking about mail, letters and writing and punctuation and all of that, the lead instruments all drop out and it's just the percussion, so you can really hear what he's talking about. So like he's describing literal punctuation and syntax in his sentences, and it's being punctuated by this punchy percussion here. The instruments are also kind of acting as punctuation. Like in the second verse, he's singing a lyric that means, the second letter that I've written, and I received nothing from you. Yeah. At which point the bass does this. Aww. And then when he says punto y seguido, it's just like
semi-stop, and you continue in the same paragraph.
Full stop, continue, or punto y aparte, which is like like
full stop.
Okay.
And then you go into the next.
The instruments, as they're coming back in, punctuate what he's saying with these stabs. Punto y aparte. Very clever. There's the discussion of social issues. I don't care anymore if there's light in the neighborhoods or if inflation goes up.
At the time, the electric company in Dominican Republic was having a lot of problems. Even if they were using a little bit of water, a dam, to create electricity, was not enough. So they have to control what neighborhood will have electricity at what time. Mm-hmm. And that is what he's talking about, the luz.
Even though in the song he's saying, I don't care about that anymore, I just, you know, care about your love, basically. He's still drawing attention to these social issues.
Exactly.
As the lyrics start to open up emotionally, so does the orchestration, which he is arranging. You know, like, that's not true of every artist. Ugh, amazing. Amazing. And it's very busy. He's desperately explaining his feelings and laying out all of his sort of florid metaphors and the depth and the intensity of his experience. But when he gets to the chorus, the horns drop out and it's just the percussion and the piano and the bass. The lyrics slow down. There aren't as many words crammed into each line. And he makes the central thesis of the song perfectly clear. Please love me again.
The only time that I have life is when I'm close to you.
That sort of concept forms the basis later in the song at the montuno. They create a refrain out of that first line in the chorus. Middle section is more passionate, it's busy, there are more emotions, there's more of his experience being described, and then it just distills down in the chorus. I think that is, again, masterfully arranged, masterfully produced. And then there are the chords, the jazz chords. Be still my beating heart, you know I'm a chord girly. We'll go to the piano correspondent who will tell us about the introduction. Almost right, but not quite, my friend. Do you want to sit on my lap instead? These are the chords for the introduction. Except with that syncopated bass line in the bottom. Or this section of the song that breaks the montuno into pieces, into the first part and the second part. Again, beautifully complex harmonically. It adds a real depth, a real profundity to this section of the song. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the brass counterpoints that I wasn't going to do before, because this is unique to Juan Luis Guerra. This isn't something that features in all salsa music. He's written this counterpoint between the trumpets and the trombones. Almost mimics the call and response that we've just had. The trumpets are doing but underneath that, the trombones are going ba-ba, ba-ba. You probably want to hear it again, right? I want to hear it again. Oh, that's nice. The last thing that I want to point out is just how good his improvised parts are in the montuno. Like, listen to the passion in his voice when he sings this. That's great. This is such good music. My God. Music like this makes me feel so grateful that I get to just spend a little time on this planet. I get a little bit of the universe's history to just sit in my house and listen to this. Magical. I mean, I love today's artist and album and songs so much that it's been granted a hallowed place on my bass case. All right, I think that's everything that I have to say about this right now. Anyway, I'm sure that there's a whole lot more I would love to say about this, but I don't have time and you're probably tired. Any parting comments that you'd like to make?
Just want to thank all of you for following Nancy on her adventure here with all the records. We look forward on Fridays to read everybody's comment. Keep doing what you're doing. We really enjoy it. Your dad and I cannot wait for Friday morning. And a cup of tea and Vinyl Friday is good.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoy it too.
I also hope you enjoy it. If not, what are you doing here? If you enjoyed this episode or you would like to support any of the things I do, I'll leave a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you are welcome to make a donation, but no pressure, friends.
Thank you for helping her with her Buy Me a Coffee. It's amazing. She enjoys going and buying records. I will be buying shoes, that's for sure.
If you're curious about what the rest of my original music sounds like, I'll also leave a link in the description to some of that so you can have a listen to it if you wish. I think that's everything. Thanks for hanging out with me while I talked about one of my favorite albums of all time. I've had a blast. I hope you have as well. I hope you've learned something, and if you knew all of this, I hope that you heard something that you'd never heard before. I'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend! Let's listen to the rest of this song. I consider to be an immensely... Oh, there's a cat spewing outside. At least she didn't come in for that. Punctuation. Someone's walking on our roof. Not just any person, we do actually have builders in. I do actually know who is on our roof. What the hell was I just saying? Yeah, you love it when I play the piano, huh? Yeah, you do. Good song.